In this section, we're going to have a look at our very first multi-child layout widget, the column. So in the layout widget section, you will see a number of layout widgets here. If you're going along alphabetically, you see where a column should be, it is not. And that's because these are grouped, and if you scroll down a little further, you're going to get to a section for multi-child layout widgets, and you will see the column there. And there is quite a bit of documentation here because you can do an awful lot with a column. It's one of those basic widgets that you can use for a number of different scenarios for laying out your application, and you will use it an awful lot. So it really helps to know the column well. So let's add one to our app. So let's get rid of everything we have in the body. We'll keep the body, but get rid of this center widget and the icon as well. And in place of the, or inside the body, we're going to put a column. And I'm going to hit spacebar twice and enter just to move myself to another line. And we saw already that among the properties available is a children property. So we've seen the child property that holds one widget. The children property holds a list of widgets. So this is your opportunity to put multiple widgets inside of another widget. And so I'm going to select children. I'm going to hit enter again. And let's create a series of boxes. That's probably going to be the best way that we can start to visualize what's happening in the column. So I'm going to create a container. I'm going to specify that its width is 50.0 pixels and its height is also 50.0 pixels. And to actually be able to see it, I'm going to give it a color, and we'll do colors.orange. Doesn't matter, but we'll pick a color. And that's going to put it up there in the very top left corner of the screen, as we have seen before. Now, what I'd like to do is add more boxes. And to actually be able to tell one box where one box ends and another begins, why don't we give it a little bit of margin so that they're not sitting right on top of each other. So the margin takes the edge insets widget, and we can do all. Open up parentheses, and I don't need a whole lot of space there. I just want to be able to get one square off of the other. So let's just say 2. And we can see that opens up a little bit of space here around the edges. Now I want to do another box, so I'm going to do a comma, and I'm going to come down here, and I could just copy this container like this. Oop, I want to get the comma too. Like that. Or, so if I save, I get a second one. Or Visual Studio Code has a really, really nice shortcut that it really helps you to know. That allows you to duplicate one line. So if I'm sitting on this line here with my cursor, on a Mac, I can hit Option Shift and down. If I'm on a Windows, I hit Alt Shift and down, and it creates a copy. So I'm going to create 5 of those containers. And as you would expect from a terminology like column, every time I add a new container, it gets added in a vertical lineup. That's what a column means. But to take a little bit closer, to look a little closer at what's going on here, let's take advantage of a tool up here in our toolbar. Now we haven't actually used this toolbar yet because we haven't had to do any hot restarts. But there are tools up here to stop debugging your application and also to do a hot restart, which differs from the hot reload that happens when you save. We don't need to go into that yet. It's not important to us. But there is a tool up here that we'd like to use at this point, and this is the inspector tool. So I'm going to click on that, and I am going to get some tools here on the right-hand side, and this gets in the way, and I can move it out of the way. I can move it up here. But there is a nice little option here that allows you as the developer to see the lines on the screen for your widgets. So this is really helpful when it comes to understanding layouts, paddings, margins, everything that you've used in your code here that is being displayed on the screen. So I'm going to click that. And this is going to show me the column right here. So I can see the column, and what I can see is that this column has extended itself all the way to the bottom of the screen. And so I have all of this space still available in my column. And that's what a column will do unless you tell it otherwise. It is going to attempt to take up all the space that it has available, which for a column goes all the way to the end of the screen. I can change that behavior. So if I come in here before children, there is a property called main access size. And for a column and for a row, which we'll learn later, there are main axes and cross axes. And a main axis in a column is up and down. That makes sense because a column goes vertically. A cross axis would be left to right in a column because that's cross to the direction that it normally wants to flow. So I can do main access size, I can hit dot because it's an enum, and the default here is max. So if I say max, nothing changes. So this column is going as far as it can, which is all the way to the bottom of the screen. If I say min, what we're going to see is that the column has now shrunk to only contain the children that it has inside of its children property. So if I were to add another one and save, I can see that it's going to expand, but it's only going to expand to the size of its children. It is not going to expand to the size of the space available to it like it would with max. All right, I'm going to flip it back to max, and because that's the default, I'm just going to get rid of it. And let's have a look at another property that you're going to use an awful lot, which is the main access alignment property. So this is going to determine where the objects in your column are going to sit. So the default is the start. So for a column, that runs from top to bottom. So all the items are going to sit as close to the top as they can get. Let me ditch this widget inspector. All right, so let's do main access alignment, and this is also an enum, so it works with a dot. And these are the options that we have. So start is the default. So if I click start, they're all still at the start of the column. If I click end, the opposite is going to happen, and all of these are going to move down as far as they possibly can. Some of these are not a mystery. Center, you might be able to guess what that's going to do. It's going to sit right in the middle of the space available. And space between is going to give you children that go all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom, and then they're spaced evenly between. There's also a space around property and a space evenly, and the evenly and the around are pretty darn close to each other. You see they do move slightly, but they're pretty close in what they do. So you use main access a lot. You will also use cross-access alignment. So this also has a helper widget and is an enum, so we do a dot. And so in a column, a cross-axis, as I said before, is going to be left to right. So there's a baseline value. Now you're only going to use that with a widget that is also has some baseline properties. So that one you don't use very often, and it's in a specific case. But center, you might use that quite a bit. So that's going to center it from left to right. And so if I hit save, then we see absolutely nothing happens. And that's because our column is only as wide as the widest child. And all of these children are uniform length. So this column is 50 pixels wide plus a little bit around with our margins. So there really is nowhere to actually center it because the left and the right side are sitting only as wide as they need to be. So if I took one of these and I said, all right, this one's going to be 20 pixels wide and 20 pixels high, now we can see that this is actually centered. If I say end, then I expect this one to go to the right side, and it does. And then stretch. Stretch is a very interesting one, and what stretch is going to do is it's going to take up as much space as possible on the cross axis as it can. So it actually has an availability to stretch all the way to the end of the phone on the right side. And so when we say stretch, I'm going to tell all of these widgets to stretch as much as they can, and they're actually going to pull themselves in the cross axis as much as they can, and you get this weird little effect. So I'm going to change that back to the default value of start, and I'm also going to change this back to the default value of start. Now, something to always keep in mind when you're working with columns and later rows is that we saw that we could change the fit and the column would shrink to the size of the children, or we could max it out and have it take up all the available space, and that's what we have here. But this available space, this is all you have to work with. So if you exceed that, you're going to get an error. So if I highlight all of these and I do Option Shift down or Alt Shift down on a Windows machine, depending on the size of your device, you might need to do that a couple of times to hit the bottom. But once you hit the bottom and you have exceeded it, you then get this yellow and black stripy error that tells you that you have gone outside of the bounds of that widget, and you'll get a nice little error here in your debug console as well. So when you lay down a column, you are only going until you have hit a boundary, and that boundary right now is the edges of the phone. If you had other widgets in here, it might be even smaller than that. And that's helpful to you in some circumstances because you want everything to appear on one screen and for them to not have to scroll. But it can also be a detriment if you don't think about how that might be impacting your user on different size screens. So one way that you could fix this is to switch to a different widget that is meant for scrolling up and down and is meant to have a large amount of widgets and it expects the user to go up and down with a swipe. Or you can keep the column, and what you can do is wrap it in a widget called a single child scroll view. And what that is going to do is convert the column to something that can be scrolled. So let's do that here, and we can do that by wrapping the widget. So I'm just going to click on the widget, and I'm going to use the Visual Studio tools to wrap with the widget. We see I have some options here. The single child scroll view is not among them, so I'm just going to pick the wrap with widget, and I'm going to get this generic widget, which I'm going to replace with single child scroll view. And once I do that, the error disappears, and I can scroll up and down and see all the widgets. And you might say to yourself, well, why don't they just do that all the time? Just have the column so that if it hits the edge of the phone, it automatically expands and you can scroll. Well, the answer to that is that there are consequences to what we just did. In a lot of cases, you do want the column to only take up the height of the phone. And in some instances, you don't want that. You do want it to stretch. And so you are able to configure those. And later in this course, we'll cover some of the consequences of having a column that is bounded versus one that is unbounded and can be scrolled. So that's the column widget. And then in the next section, we're going to take a look at the row widget, which is the horizontal cousin of the column widget and behaves very similar to the column, but in the other direction.